Hello and welcome to another entry in the Astrologer's Encyclopedia. My name is Matt. Thank you so much for joining me as always. Today's talk is going to be a bunch of example charts for the conditions of bonification and maltreatment, which are these 7 conditions that sort of mirror each other and are present unique ways for the benefics and malefics to either affirm and support significations of certain planets, in the case of bonification with the benefics, and then also the malefics, giving special conditions for them to deny, destroy, restrict, delay, make unstable the significations of other planets. So if you want an in-depth look at what the conditions are, how to identify them, some sources for where we get them, then watch the previous video, which is just showing you how to identify them and defining them and all that. So today we are just going to be doing chart examples. So I have at least 2 for each condition. Sometimes I have 3. I tried to do 1 condition of bonification by that condition and 1 chart for maltreatment. I want to give a quick content warning for things like sexual violence, murder, I think death, drug addiction and abuse, health problems, all these kinds of things. So just be forewarned. I will do my best while we are actually getting to those slides to give further warnings, but just be forewarned. So here we go with examples. There are 7 conditions. The first one and the simplest one is overcoming. So I'm not going to be doing like full definitions, but just know that overcoming is a superior square from a malefic, or an opposition from a malefic is kind of like the malefic special aspect, or an overcoming square, trine, or possibly sextile from a benefic. So the first example is Arnold Palmer. So he has the sun. I'm going to make sure to draw on the screen so you guys can see it. So he has the sun being bonified by Jupiter. So Jupiter is up here in the 10th house, bonifying the sun superior square from the 10th house. He also has Venus bonifying Saturn and the moon, which is kind of interesting, but I want to just focus on the sun. So he was a golfer. I actually don't know if he's still alive. I think he died, but so he's the sun in Virgo bonified by Jupiter in Gemini. He helped popularize the sport in like the age of television, and helped really change the image from this sport that was super elite and like only the really wealthy could play it, to something that was more accessible to the public. And the reason for that was that his father was a working class person. He was a groundskeeper at a country club. And that's how Arnold gained access to a golf course when he was a child. He learned how to golf from his father's job. And so you see the sun being something like his reputation, his image, and it's in the first, just like his personality, right? He's a TV star, he's a celebrity sports player. And it's Jupiter in Gemini, it's Jupiter in the sign of its exile, or I can never remember. There's so many terms people use for fall, and detriment, that's the one. So Jupiter is detriment. And oftentimes you'll find when planets are in their detriment, they're in an environment that is like not supportive of them, or that is just like out of the norm for them. So if we think of Jupiter and Sag as like a wealthy politician or a judge or someone with lots of influence, who's very charismatic, Jupiter in Gemini might be someone who has lots of charisma and like swagger almost, and is very attractive, but comes from like a less wealthy background or something like that. That could be one way to interpret that. And he's leveraging this reputation, 10th house thing, as like an outsider, right? Jupiter in detriment, to like bonify his personality. It's like supplementing his charm, his attractiveness, and his celebrity right there with the sun. So that's just very simple example. And that's the way that we always want to think of it for all of these conditions, is we're focusing on the planet that is being affected. So in this case, it's the sun in the first, right, in Virgo. So the sun in the first could be a person who has charisma, has charm, right? That could be like a bright sort of luminous figure, right? A celebrity could be like a sun in the first. And that is being bolstered by this Jupiter image in its detriment. So he's from a lower class than what you would typically see in golf at the time in like the 60s. And he's like shaping the image of golf going forward into the future. And he's still wildly famous because of the drink that he has, which is like half lemonade and half iced tea, which is maybe kind of a funny like twins thing, with Gemini being the twins and with Jupiter. But anyway, so the next example is Muhammad Ali. So this is a case, again, of bonification. So we have both malefics here in the 10th house. We have Saturn and Mars being bonified by a superior square from Venus in Aquarius. And so what happened here is he was known during his lifetime as kind of like a rebel. He was a conscientious objector for the Vietnam War and was banned from fighting for like 5 or 6 years during his prime. He was 25 to I think 29 or 30. And so he has all these outspoken stances that relative to the society at the time were very unpopular. You know, he was subject to lots of racism and all that kind of stuff. But he still today is remembered extremely fondly as probably the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. So if the 10th house is reputation and career, and the planets in it are representing our malefics, right? It could be that his reputation is he could be seen as kind of like a bad boy or a rebel or someone who's really aggressive or that kind of thing. You could also see with Mars here that he's a fighter. He's literally a boxer. But it is ruled or not ruled by being bonified by Venus here in the 7th, and it's improved significantly. Like you could see someone with malefics in the 10th being viewed as like evil or bad or threatening or malicious, right? But because of the influence of Venus, who actually also does rule them, it's in Taurus, bonifies them and improves that significantly. And I think also his wife at one point was like the manager of his estate and like ended up making like a ton of money for his family, something like that. Like she published his spoken word poetry and like his writings and things like that. Someone that's kind of hazy, that detail. So if someone actually knows that, then correct me. Also, Jupiter would be bonified here as well. And Jupiter being the ruler of the 8th house could be related to like litigation and lawsuits. And Jupiter in general could be like lawsuits and court. And he ends up winning a ton of like very public court cases and ends up being able to come back to boxing. So that's Muhammad Ali. And then this is a case of maltreatment. And for this, there's a little content warning as well for like abuse and alcoholism. So he is an American, supposed to say actor and artist. So he has a lot of maltreated planets. So he has Saturn maltreating Jupiter by square, Saturn maltreating the Sun by opposition, and then he has Mars maltreating Venus and Mercury. So pretty much every planet except the moon and the malefics are maltreated. And you don't really have any examples of bonification. I guess you do. The Sun and Venus and Mercury would also be bonified, which is interesting. So there's a couple of things. One is Sun is maltreated, so you can think of the relationship with the father. Shia LaBeouf attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings with his father as a child and said that he suffered verbal and mental abuse from his father. And one time his father held a gun to his head because he was having a Vietnam War flashback. And so that could also be perhaps related to Mars in the 12th. But you see, it's not even degree based. They're 15 degrees off, and the Sun here is still very troubled. So there's another slide for Shia LaBeouf. He has also suffered from alcoholism himself, has been abusive to his female partners, and has been accused of plagiarism. So this is actually like really funny, the plagiarism thing, not the alcoholism and abuse. But so we can think of Mars being opposite to Venus across the 12th and 6th house, the 6th house being physical ailments in a water sign with Venus is like perhaps indulging in this intoxicating substance to the severe detriment of the native, this exalted Mars in the 12th house. So it's Mars in the 12th that's very effective at doing what it signifies. So creating like demons for the native or creating spiritual psychic problems for the native and inflicting those upon Venus, who's here in the body in a water sign again. So that would be perhaps one way of seeing the like alcoholism. That could also be Saturn opposite the Sun as well, with the 5th house being things that are pleasurable and fun, being opposed by Saturn. And his father was also an alcoholic, and these things can be kind of inherited more or less. The abuse of women is also Mars opposite Venus. And then you see the plagiarism could be Mars opposite Mercury as well. And again, just all these planets being, especially like in bad houses, is very impactful. So the plagiarism thing is like really funny to me. So he plagiarized this like screenplay completely like word for word and like made a movie and was promoting it for like over a year before anyone found out. And then he published this apology on Twitter that was also plagiarized from a Yahoo Answers page from like 6 years before that. And so that's you get Mars maltreating Mercury, Mercury being words, speeches. In the sixth house is like giving words from a weak position, apologizing for things, and Mars opposing that, just giving, stealing, disrepute, infamy, that kind of a thing. And then all of this affects his income. So like lately, the last couple of years, people have not wanted to cast him in movies. And so you have Saturn here maltreating Jupiter in Pisces in the second. He's still very wealthy. And the planet in Pisces, Jupiter and Pisces, is actually bonifying all of these planets. So even though these planets are like really suffering from Saturn and Mars, it's quite the diagram, Jupiter is here also bonifying them. So you get things like his wealth and status as a celebrity is like insulating him from like the true consequences of his actions or from the true depths of his illness, because he can afford things like treatment. And his reputation, it was like, I didn't know any of this until, and I'm not like that into celebrity gossip and stuff, but I didn't know any of this. I thought he was like the guy from Holes when I went to look at his chart. I thought he was like the dude from Transformers only. So he has like great fame and great infamy or scandal, you could say. So this is a good example of how these conditions can like commingle, especially with overcoming. This one is like so common. Like a lot of charts will have at least one example of overcoming, even if it's like a benefic bisextile or something like that. And remember, it's sign based. So like this is 16 degrees away from Saturn, and you still see these things impacting his like livelihood. Or like Mars is here 13 degrees away from Mercury. And it could be that like I know it's a lot more public, his abuse towards who was it, FKA Twigs, I think. That was like much, much more public and perhaps more of an impact on his life than this plagiarism thing was. But I think it actually also turned out that like people then retroactively like went over his other work that he had directed or produced and found like other examples. So it's just interesting. Things will become more intense generally as they become closer by degree, but the sign-based things are very, very important to look at. So the next condition is counteraction. So counteraction is when you have either a well-placed planet by house, so a planet that's in 1st, 11th, 10th, 9th, 4th, 7th, 5th, or maybe 3rd, that is ruled by a malefic in a bad house. That would be counteraction maltreatment. Or you have a planet that is in a bad house and ruled by a benefic that is in one of those, what I just mentioned, like quote unquote good houses. So what you have is like the planet that is, let's say, in the 10th, let's say you have like Venus in the 10th, you would then, and that's ruled by Saturn in the 12th or something like that, it would drag down the condition of Venus because the ruler that's responsible for giving Venus what she needs is like incompetent or absent or impoverished, or these kinds of things. And the reverse being like, let's say Saturn in the 12th or something is ruled by Venus in the 10th, then that would be good for Saturn because Venus is in a powerful position to help him with these like bad house matters. So the first one is a condition of bonification by counteraction. This is going to be the chart of Judy Garland. So we have Mars and the moon here in the 6th house, bad house, being ruled by Jupiter in the 4th. The 4th is not the best house, but it's a good house. It's angular, it's busy, it's strong, it can see the ascendant. It's like the worst angle. It's like a weaker good house, you could say. It's like probably the 2nd or 3rd weakest of the good houses. So we see here, she's an actress and a singer. She's known for her roles in The Wizard of Oz, A Star is Born, and The Judy Garland Show. And starting very, very young, she's given like amphetamines and sleeping pills to work all day and then have to sleep very suddenly while she's still on amphetamines and then wake up and do it all again. So she's, again, 6th house being physical problems. A lot of times you'll find addictions here, especially with Mars. Like amphetamines are very like Martian type of drug. They just make you like go, 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 go. And so despite all of this, and she like developed drug addiction and alcoholism from this early environment while she's filming things like The Wizard of Oz. And it's also opposite to her son. So her son just being like her vitality, her life force, the plot line of her life is all sort of detrimentally affected. The son is being maltreated here by Mars. And this would be not overcoming, but opposition. And it's actually very close. So what happens though is that even though she's like being fed drugs all the time and she's having to work all the time and she's being totally abused by Hollywood and being like called ugly by filmmakers, she was like as far as I have learned, she's the original sort of like girl next door, and then she's typeset as that, and we have her being compared to like other actresses at the time, and producers are like, oh, you're like not sexy, you're ugly, so we don't want to cast you for anything other than like cute girl roles. But despite all this, she is able to achieve huge success, wealth, and like busyness, right? Business in her life. And so here we see that Jupiter being in like not the best house, but a pretty good house gives her big success, but a short life. So she dies, I think, at like 43 or 47 or something. She died pretty young from, I don't know if it's like actually confirmed, but it's speculated that it's from like long drug use. So again, that's just these planets, if they were able to just run amok, would cause huge problems. And they did, but they were insulated from some of their effects and ended up working in her favor in some way because of Jupiter ruling the planets. So the next one is the chart of Barack Obama, the former president. And this is a case of maltreatment. So we have Jupiter here in the first, barely in the first house in Aquarius, being ruled by Saturn in the 12th. So this is, again, an example where it's kind of middling, like it could be worse. And this is always like, this is really what you want to look for when you're looking at these things, is there's no like one condition that's going to be make it or break it in a chart. There's always like so many things that you need to consider, where it's like, if Jupiter was in Saturn sign, but Saturn is like not in Saturn sign and in a bad house, then that makes this significantly worse, because Saturn, even though it's in a bad house, is in Capricorn, and that is a big bonus, you know. So there's like a, what do they call it, liking girding between these two signs, because they're both ruled by Saturn. So there's still sort of a line of sight, you could say. There's a connection between them. So Jupiter's not like completely abandoned, but anyway, Jupiter's here in the first house, giving stature, magnanimity, influence, power. He's a lawyer first, right? So that's a very Jupiterian trade, is law and government. So he is a lawyer, then a senator, then a president, right? So it's not like he's being really not having status and power from this Jupiter. It's just that he's not able to like completely implement his agenda due to things like the opposition party being in power, right? So the host of his environment is against him, is in a bad spot. There's congressional gridlock, there's racism, there's like the birth certificate thing. So he gets some of his policies passed, and he runs on this very Jupiterian thing of like change and hope and, you know, yes, we can, all these kinds of things. But Saturn's like, well, you know, we can get some of that done, but we're going to make it like really difficult and attack your reputation the whole time, and yada, yada, yada. So that's another pretty interesting one, where it's Jupiter is able to provide good outcomes, but also it's retrograde. So the outcomes are either not that long lasting or incomplete in their full effect, where like, for example, Obamacare was way broader than what we actually got. It was like, I don't know exactly, but it was something way closer to like actual universal healthcare than the like insurance program that we got. And even the rollout of it was like really bad. It was like the website crashed and there was like tons of delays and it was like all this kind of stuff. So that's counteraction. So the next condition is enclosure. And so this is when you have a planet that is caught between either the bodies or the rays, so the aspect by degree of two benefics, that would be bonification, or two malefics, which would be enclosure. So this is like my favorite example, I think, in this whole slideshow. And his chart comes back actually for a later condition. So we have Charles Manson, Mars in Virgo, being, and this would again be obviously another trigger warning, content warning. So we have Mars in Virgo being bonified by enclosure. So we have Jupiter shooting its ray down to 7 Virgo, sextile ray, and Venus shooting it to 18. And ideally, you want these to be within 7 degrees. It's not like a hard rule, but ideally, the like most effective range is that the planet is within 7 degrees of both of the enclosing planets. And so we see here that like Mercury sends a ray to 2, so it's outside the enclosure range. Saturn sends it to 19, so it's outside of the enclosure range, and there's no aspect from Saturn and the moon. If there was an aspect from any of these planets that was like let's say the moon was at I don't know, like 15 Sag, center ray right there, that would be known as intervention. And so then the enclosure would be broken up and Mars would not be bonified. And so in this case, we see Mars. What are Mars's significations? They're violence, murder, bloodshed, death, militaries, like strict ordered, like cults, you could even say. And so Charles Manson is a cult leader who murders people, or he didn't actually murder people, but it was his quote unquote family. So it's the Manson family, his sort of symbolic children, again, fifth house, are committing murders on his behalf. So that's like Mars is being empowered to be effective. So it's really interesting here where we have to think of these things as not being like good necessarily, right, from the perspective of like morals or ethics, right? It's good for this planet's significations, which can be really bad, but it was good for Charles Manson. He gets to amass all this power. He gets to live the life of like being worshipped all the time. He gets to kill people on command. And it's horrible for other people, but this is also, things like sect come into play. This is the benefic or the malefic contrary to sect. This is Mars in a day chart. Not good, right? And Mars also has triplicity rulership. It's in a good house. So Mars is like really effective in giving him power through violence. And then also you see fifth house topics are doing pretty well here as well. We see he was friends with Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys. Dennis Wilson introduces him to record labels, executives, and brings him into the studio. And one of Charles Manson's songs makes it onto the Beach Boys album 2020. It was, I wrote it on Twitter. I can't remember what it is, but they changed the name of it. But like one of Charles Manson's songs exists on a Beach Boys album, like that he wrote, which is pretty crazy. So again, we have Martian topics of death, murder, violence, and then we also have fifth house topics of music, right? And he's a musician, and also like his whole thing with the Beatles, right? He was just like fascinated with what was that song, Helter Skelter, and thought it was going to like incite a race war. That's also like marriage of fifth house and Mars is like musical incited war, right? So just very interesting. Next is Jodie Foster. So this is another, definitely probably the biggest trigger warning in the whole slideshow. So it's not, let me go back. So I have this long quote from her, but first I'll just introduce the planet that is enclosed, and it is Venus. So we see Venus here in Scorpio in the 12th house retrograde under the beams. Not looking good for her. And it's enclosed between Mars at 17 and Saturn at 6. So this is, you see, the difference here is 10 degrees. So that's why I was saying, like, ideally you want it to be within 7, but this, in this case, it's within 10. And this is definitely a case of maltreatment by enclosure. So I'm just going to read this quote. It says, adult males found themselves attracted to foster. It was by design, right? And this is, this is in relation to, I'll get to it. So it says, adult males found themselves attracted to Foster. It was by design. Writer Ben Starr, who helped pick Foster early in her career to star in a TV pilot, admitted, quote, she was selected because Jodie delivered her lines not like a precocious 9-year-old, but like a sophisticated young woman. What Jodie offers is the face of a cute little kid, but it's wrapped in a package that titillates. There is the suggestion of future wickedness. Hey, mister, I bet you can't wait till I grow up, can you? So here we have Venus signifying things like beauty, attractiveness in the 12th. So it could be something like her, the beauty of her, right? In some way brings her suffering, brings her 12th house topics of estrangement, enemies, hostility, suffering, tragedy, loss, all the 12th house topics. And so we see here that she's like a target of this like pedophilic lust kind of. And this is what this is in relation to is the guy who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan was stalking her and tried to kill Ronald Reagan to like get her attention and impress her. And that was just like in the same section on Wikipedia. So, and I just thought that quote was like perfect for that. And so here's another case of where it's like, this stuff gets really, really nasty. And it's just something to be aware of when looking at astrology. So some other things are she plays these sort of Venus maltreated characters. So she plays a child sex worker in Taxi Driver. And this is actually like encouraged by her mother to take this role because her mom thought that she was going to be like aging out of child roles. And so her mother, because it was, who directed that? Martin Scorsese, I think. She was in a previous film of his, and then the mother like got her into this one, helped her get into this one. She plays a rape survivor, like a gang rape survivor, and it's like a court movie, I think, in a movie called The Accused, and then the FBI agent who interviews Hannibal Lecter and is like trapped in this house with the serial killer in Silence of the Lambs. So you see these roles where it's like a woman in a really bad condition, a woman in a maltreated condition, right, where she's a sex worker, she's a victim, she's alone in a house with a serial killer, that kind of a thing. And then she had multiple stalkers in college, including John Hinckley Jr., who, like I said, attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan to impress her. She had another one who like had a gun at a play that she was in and was going to kill her, but then like saw her performance in the play and decided not to kill her. So that's like a really, really difficult example. And it's like these conditions of maltreatment are, when they're stacked with other things like this, can be like really, really bad. And another thing that I actually didn't include in this was that she was like mauled by a lion, like Mars in Leo overcoming Venus. She was like mauled by a lion on set of a movie that she was in as a child when she was like 8 or 9. And it like messed up her back, and it's just like insane. So really, really difficult example, but a very vivid one for sure. So the next is adherence, and this is when planets are within 3 degrees applying to a bodily conjunction, either with a benefic or a malefic. So first up, we have David Bowie, British musician and actor. The moon here is maltreated by Saturn. So the moon is applying to conjoined Saturn here in Leo. And this is kind of interesting too, where Saturn's like really not doing well because Saturn is in detriment in Leo, even though they're angular. But Saturn's not doing well. So the moon is applying to a like unhappy malefic. It's in a day chart, so whatever. But there's a couple of things on this. First thing is he came out as gay in 1972, at a time when that was a much bigger thing to do and a much more controversial and difficult thing to do. And he's quoted in 2002 as saying, "I don't think it was a mistake in Europe, but it was a lot tougher in America. I think it stood in the way of so much of what I wanted to do." So what he means by that is that in America, he was viewed as like a symbol for gay rights and gay people, and he didn't want that. He wanted to be a musician. He didn't want to be known for like who he was sleeping with and who he was attracted to. He wanted to be known for his music. And so he viewed that as a negative in his life. And then there was like a various like coming outs as gay, as bisexual, as whatnot, like throughout his career. So he says in 1983 that coming out as bisexual was, quote, "the biggest mistake I ever made. I was always a closet heterosexual." So we see again here the 7th house topics being related to like partnership, marriage, who you're sleeping with, who you're together with, sort of causing problems in his life for him. And then also we have Bowie having long struggle with drug abuse, especially cocaine during his time in Los Angeles, and it spurred like a ton of just like controversial things. Like he had that period, like if you know David Bowie as the Thin White Duke, where he was like using Nazi paraphernalia and like was allegedly did like a Nazi salute on like a bus or at a show or something like that. And so the moon can be something about your reputation, about the content of your life, about like the people broadly, maybe especially if you're famous. But the moon can also be your health, and it also rules the 6th house, so it's like doubly about his health in this case. And so we see the moon applying to Saturn, bad things happening to the moon, drug addiction, right, and ill health. And then another thing that is, this is like one of the things where it's just like unbelievable how specific it is. So in high school, he's punched in his left eye by a friend in a fight over a girl, leading to a 4-month hospitalization, several surgeries, permanent dilation of the pupil, and faulty depth perception. And so in this case, we see here's the moon as ruler of the 6th. It's in the 7th. There's a conflict with Saturn over a girl. It's in Leo too, which is just kind of interesting that he's like seeking the attention of a woman. He's like having this display of pride and like aggression for a woman. And then according to Valens, the moon rules the left eye. And so he has this permanent damage and this like scarring mark on his left eye. And so what I thought, and what everyone else seems to have thought, is that he had like 2 different colored pupils. He had heterochromia, but he doesn't. He just has a permanently dilated pupil because he was punched in the face over a girl. And that's the moon applying to Saturn in the 7th house in Leo. And then the last thing is that he might not have, but his half brother and who had the same mother, and 2 of his aunts on his mother's side had schizophrenia. And there's a couple of places that you might see this other than the moon, or there's at least one. So you do see the moon with the mother, right, applying to Saturn. So there's things about the mother that will be maltreated in the life of the native. And then we also see like the ruler of the third in the 12th, which can be, brother is mentally ill or something like that. And it is Kazim is kind of interesting. His brother, I think, committed suicide, and Bowie like blamed himself. So that's kind of off topic, but that's just an interesting note. And there's other cases of maltreatment here as well, where like Jupiter is maltreated by Mars because Mars is in the 12th house and Jupiter's in the 10th, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of layers to this, but this one, there was just so much stuff with the 7th house, with the left eye, with the fight over the girl, with the sexuality being a big issue for him, and all that. So the next one is Leonardo DiCaprio. So this one, I was right before I filmed, I realized is not maybe the best example because the sun is applying actually to a trine with Saturn before it gets to Venus, but it still works out. So we have Venus bonifying the sun here. The sun is moving towards a conjunction with Venus, and you have him being incredibly wealthy and making tons of money, being in the highest grossing film ever at one point with Titanic. Did I use equal houses for this? I never use equal houses. That's weird. Anyway, so the sun rules the 11th, or I'll get to that in a second. So the sun is in the second with Venus. He's in the highest grossing film of all time with Titanic. It's this like water disaster romance, right? With like Mars, the sun, and Venus in Scorpio. It's like this ship is sinking and there's a love story and he dies, I think. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but he dies, she lives, and even like Saturn in Cancer in the 10th is like he's most famous, maybe not anymore, but at one time was most famous for this, again, watery disaster film. Highest grossing film of all time. His films have grossed $7.2 billion. It's like top 10 like most earning actors. Again, Titanic, and then he's had this really productive relationship with Martin Scorsese, where they've made Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, Shutter Island, and The Wolf of Wall Street together. So that would be the ruler of the 11th being bonified by Venus. So this very productive friendship, this very productive professional partnership. It's also kind of interesting too, just side note with Saturn here, depressed in Cancer, or in detriment in Cancer, is that he was for so long known for being like unrecognized by the Oscars. Like he's like famous for being unacknowledged, right? That's a very Saturnian thing, and it's in a night chart. I wonder if that must have like really bugged him or something. But anyway, I think he did win an Oscar, but that's an interesting example for sure. So the next one is engagement. So this is where planets are applying to a degree-based aspect within 3 degrees. So it's kind of like a more specific version of overcoming. And so here again, we have Charles Manson, and we expand the degrees for the moon. In this case, it doesn't matter, but we do 3 degrees for every planet except the moon, which is 13. And so we see here that the moon is applying to a square with Jupiter. And it's kind of the same thing as before. He's just like able to use his like charm and reputation to create a family, right? It's like really bizarre, like family being a significator for the moon. He's very famous for this, being on the North Node and in the 10th house. And it was like very gripping to the people involved. It was a cult. They were like surrendered their lives to him and became his children. And the fact that he's still famous today, it's in Saturn's sign with Saturn in Aquarius. So he's like evil mastermind. Not that if you have Saturn in Aquarius, you're not always like an evil mastermind, but it's like his the malefics are very, very powerful in this chart. And they rule actually the entire chart, the 2 malefics. So everything here is ruled by Mars, and then these 2 are ruled by Saturn. My chart's kind of similar. Maybe I'm evil, but yeah, the moon here is being bonified by applying to Jupiter. So his reputation, his fame, his influence, his ability to create a family, to make a like quote unquote maybe safe space for people, his ability to manipulate the emotions of others, especially women, would be greatly more effective, right? And so again, it's not good in the sense of moral, it's good in the sense of effective for what it's trying to do. It's very different things. So the next is Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix is going to be maltreated. His Venus is maltreated by engagement with Saturn. So Saturn's here at 9 degrees. It's actually a mutual application. So I wonder if you could then say also that Saturn is being bonified by Venus. No, because it's an opposition. So anyway, he's got Venus being maltreated by Saturn. So his music is brilliant, but his career is cut short by his early death. And then he, like many other people, had struggles with alcohol and drugs, and was described as he simply turned into a bastard when he drank, according to his friend Herbie Worthington. And then Sharon Lawrence, another friend of his, said drinking set off a bottled up anger, a destructive fury that he almost never displayed otherwise. So again, we have Saturn here being like the bottling up. And then, you could also say that Mars in the 12th in Scorpio, again, it's a watery sign, is issues related to anger, to Martian things that relate to water. So anger from drinking, right? And it ends up killing him. So he ends up dying by swallowing his own, or suffocating on his own vomit after drinking and taking a large dose of sleeping pills. So that's also, it's kind of Martian in the sense that it's alcohol, but it's also Saturnian in the sense that he died from like sedatives and like while he was asleep in this state of like ignorance, this state of darkness and like unconsciousness, being Saturn, opposite to Venus, and all that. And so there was also like some pretty severe mistreatment of his music and assets after he died. I don't really know any specifics, but they like released a ton of stuff that like he might not have wanted to be released, and there's just been lots of controversy over his catalog after he's passed. So the final one is striking with a ray, and so this one is kind of complicated. I don't look for it all the time. It's a strange one. It kind of contradicts some of the other ones. Definitely go watch the other video if you want like a better definition of it, or read Chris Brennan's book. That's a better way to do it. So striking with a ray is where there will be, like, let's say we have Venus in the 10th and Saturn in the 1st, and Venus is applying to a square with Saturn. Saturn can maltreat her by shooting like a backwards aspect. And so my thinking, and it seems to be that you have to be within 3 degrees. So my thinking on it is that you like, let's use this first example. So the first example is Venus Williams, who, funny enough, has Libra rising. So Venus is her in the chart, and Venus is maltreated by Saturn. So we have Venus retrograde, so moving this way, applying to a square with Saturn. So in this case, Saturn would be bonified by Venus, but Venus would also be maltreated by Saturn. It's really kind of interesting. So it's almost like whenever you have an engagement, I think engagement is the one where it's an aspect. Engagement is the one where it's an aspect. You are also going to have a striking with a ray. So it's kind of like, I think one way that I've heard it described is like when you have like the overcoming planet can be seen as like the wrestler who is on top in the dominant position. They're going to have more control over the situation, but the wrestler on the bottom is still going to have some way of like turning around and harming the one on top. And another example that I've heard, which maybe is a little bit clearer, is that assuming both planets are direct, you have them both moving like this way. And so you would have Saturn sort of walking this way. And so you imagine that like Venus is walking behind Saturn and can see Saturn, but Saturn's looking forward. So Venus has like more awareness of the situation. And then what Saturn can do though is Saturn can like turn around sometimes and like throw things at Venus, right? That's kind of how it works. And so I guess if Venus is being, and you'll see it in the next example, but like if Venus is striking with a ray, it's like throwing like a ray of kindness or something backwards. But Saturn's throwing this like malevolent, like icy, like ice bolt or something back at Venus. So, and I think it tends to be weaker. I think it tends to be like these are not as bad as if Saturn was overcoming Venus. I think it's a weaker condition, but that's just me kind of speculating. So if you have any thoughts on that, please let me know. So Venus Williams, Venus is maltreated by Saturn. She is very famous and known for being like an incredible tennis player, and maybe this is just me, she's always known as like the second best. She's not quite the best because of her younger sister, which is also, Venus in Mercury sign could be one of Mercury's significations is siblings. One of Venus's significations is sisters. We also have Mercury here in the 10th. So that's kind of interesting. And then Venus ruling the 1st, her career has had just like lots of injuries. especially like in the mid 2000s. I think she like 2000 to 2010, she had a lot of injuries with like her back or something. I can't really remember, but she's had lots of injuries and has kind of been overshadowed by her younger sister. And that's kind of interesting as well with Venus under the beams and retrograde, right? So she has this like explosive start to her career, but then it kind of backs off as her sister becomes more prominent and as her injuries sort of take effect. So yeah. And the last one is Henri Matisse, the French painter. So the moon in this case is bonified by Venus. So the moon is here. And this is like probably an even weaker example, but there's just, I thought it was pretty interesting. So the moon is here applying to Venus. Venus is is striking the moon with a ray. It's a sextile, but you could say that because it's a night chart and because Venus is the nocturnal benefic, and that like the sextile is her aspect, that the Venusian sextiles would be more powerful than like a Jupiterian trine. You could say, you could make that argument. And so he's known for being just like super innovative painter using color and form. Those are art words that I found on Wikipedia. He's known as a member of the Fauves. I don't know how to speak French. Wild Beasts, a group of painters characterized by strong, loose brushstrokes and vibrant colors. So you see kind of like a playfulness and like a wildness, which could be kind of related to the moon, but also Saturn being with the moon. And this is the part that I think is really cool, is that he was first given painting supplies by his mother while he's recovering from appendicitis. So he is, the moon is being bonified by Venus, and because the moon is superior to Venus, the moon is also having an effect on Venus. It's kind of this double thing. So painting being Venus, painting being the fifth house, and the moon there having this mutually beneficial relationship, and from a health problem, right? Saturn with the moon. He's introduced to painting, and he's like 30 or something. He's like pretty old. That's not old, but you know what I mean. And then he also used his wife and daughter as frequent models for his paintings. So there again, you see like the benefic relationship between the moon, the mother, and Venus in the seventh, the wife, or the not the mother, the moon being the child in this case with the fifth house, and the mother because she helped him get a start with painting. So that is the last example. If there are any questions, please feel free to leave them below, or like you can shoot me a DM on Twitter. These are really kind of complicated. They're like not always easy to understand, especially things like counteraction and enclosure. There was like I had like 4 other examples of enclosure that I was just made the mistake of thinking they were enclosures when they weren't. And so I was like very, very careful with this one, where I had like Walt Disney. I thought his moon was enclosed, but there was an intervention. I had some other actress who I thought the sun was enclosed, but it actually wasn't. But yeah, so yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Patreon. All that stuff will be down below. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.